A nurse's moment of carelessness pushes a dying man to the brink, but his daughter, a powerful judge, won't let the crime go unpunished. As the lines between guilt and redemption blur, both women must face their darkest truths. In the end, justice is served, but at what cost to their souls? But before we start, if you guys like this story, please comment below and subscribe to Story Storer. Please hit the bell icon. Thank you. The monitor's beeping had slowed to an ominous irregularity, each sound more distant than the last. John Parker's chest rose and fell with a laborious rhythm, as though each breath might be his last. Sweat glistened on his pale forehead, and his cracked lips parted in a desperate plea. "Please, help me," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. Nurse Andrea Blake glanced at him from her station, her face impassive. Her shift had been long and grueling, filled with demanding patience and endless paperwork. She was tired, emotionally drained, and frankly she had little patience left. Parker was just another name on a chart, another fading life in a sea of suffering. "Someone will be in shortly," she said curtly, turning back to her computer screen. The sterile hum of hospital machines was the only sound filling the room, interrupted only by the distant beeping of the monitor. John Parker's breaths came in slow, laborious gasps, his face pale, his body frail. Every breath seemed like it could be his last. The urgency of his condition was apparent, yet Nurse Andrea Blake remained at her station, fatigued and detached. She had seen it all before, patients fading in the darkness of the night, their suffering a constant rhythm. But this one felt different. The door to the room swung open with a force that shattered the silence. Evelyn Parker, tall and commanding in her judge's robe, strode into the room, her presence undeniable. Her face, usually stern and unwavering, melted as her gaze fell upon her father. "Dad?" Her voice cracked, betraying the raw emotion beneath the steel facade. She had never imagined this moment would come so soon. Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway, her heart racing as she took in the sight of her father, once a towering figure in the courtroom, now lying so frail and vulnerable. John Parker had spent decades fighting for justice, his name known across the state as a fierce civil rights attorney. He had always been a hero to her, a constant source of strength and guidance. She had followed his footsteps, eventually finding herself in the judge's seat, dispensing justice with the same unyielding commitment he had shown. But now, as she stood over him, Evelyn felt a sense of helplessness she had never known. The powerful man who once spoke with conviction in courtrooms was reduced to a mere shadow of himself. Memories of their shared battles for justice flooded her mind, but the weight of the present was suffocating. Her father's fight was no longer in the courts. It was here, in this sterile room, and she wasn't sure if she could win it. Andrea Blake had once entered the nursing profession with boundless optimism, eager to care for people and make a difference. But years of long shifts, endless paperwork, and watching countless patients slip away had slowly worn her down. She had become a shell of the idealistic nurse she once was, her compassion dulled by exhaustion and frustration. Tonight was no different. Her shift had been grueling, and John Parker was just another name on a chart, another fading patient to manage. She had spent the day running between rooms, patching wounds, administering medication, and consoling families. Her energy had evaporated long ago, replaced by a numbness she didn't know how to shake. When John's condition began to worsen, Andrea's mind was clouded. She couldn't focus as she should have. Her fatigue compromised her actions, and in that moment she failed. As she stood there, holding the IV drip for John, the weight of her failure pressed down on her. She had seen patients slip away before, but something about this felt different. Maybe it was the look of desperation in John's eyes, or the anger she felt toward herself. Whatever it was, Andrea knew she had made a mistake, and that mistake could cost him everything. The medical team worked frantically to stabilize John, their actions swift and precise. Evelyn watched from the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. The nurse had neglected her father, and Evelyn knew it was more than just a careless oversight. It was a betrayal. As the minutes passed, her mind raced. This wasn't just about a medical error, it was about accountability. Justice, after all, was something Evelyn had been raised to uphold in every corner of her life. Andrea, her face pale with anxiety, worked alongside the doctors, her hands trembling as she assisted. She could feel Evelyn's gaze on her, and the guilt inside her was suffocating. But in that moment it wasn't just about the mistake. It was about a chance for redemption. As the doctors successfully stabilized John, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope for both her father's future and the nurses. But she knew the road ahead would not be an easy one. The hospital corridor felt unusually quiet as Andrea stood outside John Parker's room, her hands trembling. She had spent the last few hours replaying the events in her mind, the harsh reality of her mistake sinking in with every passing minute. She had failed him. She had failed the man who, in his prime, had fought for the rights of so many, now lying weak and vulnerable in that sterile bed. Andrea had always prided herself on being the nurse who went above and beyond, but in that moment, exhaustion had blinded her judgment. Taking a deep breath, she knocked lightly on the door and stepped inside. Evelyn Parker sat by her father's side, her face a mixture of concern and authority. The judge looked up, her gaze sharp but unreadable. "Judge Parker," Andrea began, her voice shaking, "I owe you an apology for what happened with your father. I wasn't focused. I let my fatigue get the best of me, and it clouded my judgment." She struggled to maintain composure. "There's no excuse for what I did. I failed in my duty, and I am truly sorry." Evelyn watched her for a long moment, her eyes never leaving Andrea's face. The silence between them was heavy, but Andrea knew she had to say it. She had to own her mistake. Evelyn regarded Andrea carefully, the tension in the room palpable. She could see the genuine remorse in the nurse's eyes, but that didn't make the situation any less difficult. Her father had always taught her that justice wasn't about perfection. It was about learning from mistakes and making things right. Evelyn had spent her entire life holding others accountable, but now she found herself in the uncomfortable position of deciding whether to hold Andrea accountable as well. "People make mistakes," Evelyn said, her voice steady but soft. "It's what happens after that matters. What you do when you realize you've gone wrong." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I don't know you, Andrea, but what you've said here, and the way you've come to me, shows that you're ready to learn from this." Andrea's eyes filled with emotion as Evelyn's words registered. "I promise it won't happen again," she whispered, her voice thick with sincerity. Evelyn gave a small nod. "Then that's all I can ask for." In the days that followed, John Parker's condition steadily improved, and Evelyn remained at his side, her thoughts consumed with the events that had unfolded. She and her father shared quiet moments, reminiscing about their shared battles for justice. Andrea, meanwhile, worked tirelessly, her dedication renewed. The change was noticeable, her compassion had returned, and she became a more attentive, patient nurse. Her colleagues saw the transformation, and the patients felt it. Andrea was no longer the woman who had let exhaustion cloud her judgment. She had found her purpose again, and in doing so, found redemption. The day John was discharged, Evelyn and Andrea met in the hospital corridor. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgment of the journey they had both traveled. "Thank you for keeping your promise," Evelyn said, her voice warm but firm. Andrea nodded, gratitude in her eyes. "And thank you for giving me a chance." As Evelyn guided her father out of the hospital, a sense of closure settled over her. Justice had been served, not through a ruling, but through compassion and accountability. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt peace.